Good evening, I'm Nima and this is Forum Daily for Monday, April 10th. And tonight we begin in Alberta, where the Ethics Commissioner is investigating whether Premier Danielle Smith interfered in the administration of justice. Now, last month, the opposition NDP played a recording of Ms. Smith's phone call with Calgary Street Pastor Artur Pawlowski. In the call, she told him the charges against him were politically motivated. Ms. Smith also offered to make inquiries on his behalf and report back to him. Mr. Pawlowski is due to go on trial on charges related to the COVID-19 border protest at Coutts early last year. The Premier's office said Ms. Smith is confident that a probe by the Provincial Ethics Commissioner will determine that she has done nothing wrong. All right, well, meanwhile, tens of thousands of Hydro-Quebec customers are still without power. Now, this comes following last week's ice storm. Hydro-Quebec has 1,500 workers that are trying to reconnect the last 35,000 customers without power. The utility says some people may have to wait until tomorrow to have the lights back on. Hydro-Quebec said Monday that close to 95% of the outages caused by Wednesday's storm have been resolved. The utility's vice president of operations and maintenance said that to his knowledge, all senior residences and long-term care homes have now been reconnected. Health officials have warned residents not to use charcoal barbecues to keep warm. This comes as hundreds of cases of carbon monoxide poisoning have been reported in Montreal since the storm. All right, turning our attention to a city north of Toronto. Officials at a mosque in Markham are calling on the provincial and federal governments to take action after an alleged hate-motivated attack took place there last week. The president of the Islamic Society of Markham wants to see Ontario pass legislation, which would, among other proposals, expand educational resources and challenge Islamophobia, as well as create a provincial hate crimes watchdog. York Regional Police are investigating the incident, which took place just after dawn prayers on Thursday. The suspect is charged with 1 count each of assault with a weapon, uttering threats, and dangerous driving. Recent moves by the city of Vancouver to remove unhoused campers and their tents is garnering criticism from the Hospital Employees Union. The union calls the clearing of Hastings Street cruel, unsafe, and dehumanizing. In a statement issued over the weekend, the HEU says people living in tents on Vancouver's downtown east side aren't being offered viable housing alternatives, this while being displaced with nowhere else to go. The decampment began last Wednesday and continued over the Easter long weekend. The union says it puts people at greater health risks, further isolating them and making them more vulnerable to the toxic drug supply crisis. The HEU says the decampment risks putting more pressure on hospital emergency rooms, which are already stretched thin, along with other healthcare services. An investigation is underway in Nova Scotia after a man was found dead following a boat collision on a small lake. The RCMP learned that the 14-foot boat traveling through a narrow section of Eel Lake had crashed into a stationary boat. An RCMP spokeswoman says that after the collision on Friday, one person was rescued and a Halifax man in his 60s was reported missing. Alison Gerard says that after an extensive search, the missing boater was found dead on Sunday night. The impact of the collision sent the 2 occupants of the boat into the water, and police say neither was wearing a life jacket. Ms. Gerard says the second person who was rescued wasn't injured. Canada is facing a shortage of farmers, and a report says that the country will need to accept 30,000 permanent immigrants by 2033. Now, this in order to take over existing farms and greenhouses or establish their own. The report is from the Royal Bank, the Boston Consulting Group Centre for Canada's Future, and the Arrell Food Institute at the University of Guelph. It estimates a shortfall of 24,000 general farm, nursery, and greenhouse operators. Researchers say that the shortage will come at a critical time, and a strong agricultural sector is necessary to produce more food for a growing global population. All right, from farmers to food, a Calgary-based community group has been serving at least 1,000 immigrant families every 2 weeks. Umoja Community Mosaic founder Jean-Claude Munyazamu says many immigrants often don't know how to use canned food items or other Canadian staples available at food banks. About 1 in 4 food bank clients in Alberta self-identified as an immigrant, refugee, or visible minority group. Now, this is according to a Hunger Count report in 2022. Wood Buffalo Food Bank in Fort McMurray has been offering newcomers culturally relevant food, including halal meat, for about 10 years. Quite the program. All right, stay tuned. We have our weekly Caldwell Securities segment coming up next. We're going to be looking at the impact of interest rate hikes on Canadians. And after that, a deeper look at human rights abuses against China's Uyghur population. So stay with us. We'll have that and more news from around the world shortly after the break on Forum Daily News. Stay with us. The Bank of Canada is scheduled to announce its next interest rate and release its updated forecast for the economy in its monetary policy report on Wednesday. The central bank is widely expected by economists to keep its key interest rate target on hold at 4.5%, but its view of how the economy is unfolding will be scrutinized. The bank held its overnight rate steady at 4.5% in March after 8 consecutive interest rate hikes. All of this comes amid the rising cost of living and food inflation that continues to put pressure on Canadians' wallets. So what can be expected from the Bank of Canada's highly anticipated announcement on Wednesday? Well, joining us now to give us his take on this in our weekly Caldwell Securities segment is Brendan Caldwell, Director at Caldwell Securities Limited. Brendan, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Nima, always good to be here.
Always good to have you, Brendan. So we mentioned the Bank of Canada is likely to hold interest rates steady at 4.5%. But what are your thoughts on this? What are you expecting from Wednesday's announcement?
Expecting a whole lot of nothing, Nima. So yes, you're right. Banks don't like to surprise. Any surprise from banks, as we've seen over the decades, or I've seen over the decades at least, nothing good comes from that. So while it's supposed to be a in-camera secret thing, and then the announcements rolled out, they telegraph fairly loudly what their intentions are, so the market doesn't get blindsided, because every time they've done otherwise, it's been a thing. Here's the trick, though. If they don't raise rates, and the Americans continue to raise rates, which is, I think, more likely, then you'll see an increase in the difference between U.S. and Canadian rates. That tends to cause the U.S. dollar to go up relative to the loonie, which in itself could be inflationary, because everything we get up from the U.S. would then cost more. It's also stimulative to it's stimulative to the Canadian economy. So if we don't raise rates, it could be the opposite of what the Bank of Canada wants. It's not that you're ever able to stand still. You're either going forward or backwards.
Sounds like a counteractive move if the United States decides to raise rates, Brendan. Now, in terms of how these rates are affecting Canadians, we know they have some sort of impact on everyone, but quite a significant impact on immigrants and millennials in particular. Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, I mean, if you owe more money than you have saved, and that describes people that are new to Canada or people that don't outright own their own home yet, they owe more money than they're saving. So the price of money, the price of borrowing, works against them. If you're an oldie like me, or the generation older than I am, and you have more investments than you do debts, then higher rates actually help, because, well, you're getting more on your savings and more on your GICs. Now, the funny thing, though, is a 5% GIC is still actually losing you money in real dollars if inflation is in fact higher than that. So I think where the rate of inflation goes, both the published rate and the real rate in the world, I think will determine quite a bit going forward.
All right, Brendan. Well, on the note of inflation, I want to touch on food inflation, which continues to impact Canadians across the country. We have concerns around food insecurity, but at the same time, Loblaws recently posted gains in terms of profits, and the CEO of Loblaws recently received a raise. So how does all of this make sense in terms of dichotomy, Brendan?
Well, I have a very good friend who says, you can be right, but you can be dead right. And I do think the optics of raising salaries, well, normally with the economy is doing well, nobody has a problem with it. But our food bank that my church runs, before the pandemic, we were looking after 70 families a week. We now look after north of 500 families a week come to get food at our food bank. It's gone up sevenfold and more since this started. So there is a food insecurity issue. Prices are going up. The wisdom of having these public salary increases for CEOs of companies that distribute food, I don't know it's the best time for it. You can be right, but you can be dead right.
All right, Brendan. Now, this might be a difficult question to answer, about 45 seconds left here, but is there anything that Canadians themselves can do to curb inflation?
Any legal thing? I was just reading my good friend Joe O'Connor wrote a brilliant article in the National Post about the increase in shoplifting at grocery stores. So I don't think that's the thing. I do think that to the extent you have a mortgage, as we've talked about before, even if you've seen your floating rate mortgage go up in yield, I do think a fixed rate here is the safer bet. While interest rates might not go up terribly quickly, I don't think they're going down anytime soon. And I think a fixed rate is going to be better for people than a floating rate in the foreseeable future.
Always great advice. Again, thank you again for your time today, Brendan.
Thank you, Nima.
Stay with us. We'll be right back. And coming up after the break, we're going to speak with Human Rights Watch on the Uyghur genocide occurring in China. So stay tuned. A very interesting interview coming up next. As the war in Ukraine continues to dominate media headlines, abuses in other countries, including China, continue. According to human rights groups, over 1 million Uyghurs have been detained against their will in China's Xinjiang region. Multiple news organizations have reported a large network of detention camps that China refers to as re-education camps, where detainees are subject to unspeakable abuses. Forum Daily has conducted numerous interviews on the Uyghur genocide with first-hand testimony of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse in these detention camps. World leaders have increased efforts to hold China accountable for what human rights organizations say are crimes against humanity. But has this made any impact on the abuses that have been occurring in the country for years? Well, joining us now to give us more insight into the ongoing human rights abuses in China is Ms. Yaqiu Wang, senior China researcher at Human Rights Watch. Ma'am, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we know abuses against China's Uyghur population and other minority groups have been brought to the world stage. We know Human Rights Watch has played a key role in this. So where are we now when it comes to the Uyghur genocide? Has there been any impact from this advocacy?
Well, first of all, we don't know much what's going on inside Xinjiang because the government doesn't allow independent journalists going to the region to investigate. And of course, everybody in the region is scared to death to talk about what happened to them. And, WhatsApp, Facebook, and a lot of international social media is blocked in Xinjiang. And if you dare to install WhatsApp in your phone, you can get years in jail. So we don't know much. That being said, there have been, satellite image evidences of people being transferred from those so-called re-education camps into formal prisons, and some are forced into go to factories to be forced labor. So I don't think, the situation has changed much, but there's some commotions.
It's unfortunate to hear that the situation hasn't really changed. Now, in terms of the media attention on the war in Ukraine, how do you see this impacting international efforts to hold China accountable for these human rights abuses?
I think there are two folds. One is that the Russia's invasion of Ukraine really made people realize you should not appease dictators because Europe was appeasing Putin, and this could happen to China too, especially in the context of Taiwan. So I think people are waking up to the fact that you should not make deals with dictators. But on the other hand, it's unfortunate to see that because Europe and the US are so occupied with the Ukraine war, I mean, well, they have the attention, the resources to counter China. You can see that especially Europe is quite distracted.
Definitely. Now, in terms of other human rights abuses occurring in China, we know your research looks into freedom of expression, internet censorship, and video surveillance, which continue to be ongoing issues in the country. Can you give us more insight into this?
Well, in terms of internet censorship, I would say, China has the most sophisticated internet censorship in the country. It's not that all these apps we enjoy here in the US, like Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, are censored in China. It's also that China has its own versions of Twitter, Facebook, everything. So people inside the country doesn't feel that they don't have internet freedom because they have everything. As long as you don't talk about politics, you enjoy the same kind of entertainment, maybe better than we enjoy in the US and in Canada. This is one thing. The other is the surveillance. Well, I would say, China probably has the best surveillance in the world. Everybody is subject to pervasive surveillance. There are numerous cameras all over the country. The worst situation is in Xinjiang. Then the government is, at the forefront of facial recognition, and not to mention, you have to use your real name for everything in the country. We can register account using a Gmail that is not attached to our real identity. This is impossible in China.
You can only imagine how difficult this could make for people to stand up against some of these human rights abuses in the country. Now, what does holding China accountable look like for you, and how big of an impact could this make? Is holding the country accountable enough?
Well, because let's talk about the first step, holding the country accountable. And I think it's very hard given how powerful China is. But I feel we're closer to that than, let's say, a year ago. The UN. Let's say China has tremendous influence in the UN. But in August, the UN published a report says the crimes happening in Xinjiang could amount to crimes against humanity. That's a big thing given the context of how China would say, manipulate the human rights mechanism in the UN. So, we're still far away from holding the CCP accountable, but we're closer than ever.
Louisville police say at least 4 people were killed and 9 others injured in a shooting at a bank building in Louisville, Kentucky this morning. Louisville Metro Police Deputy Chief Paul Humphrey said the suspected shooter was also dead after the shooting, and they are still searching for a motive. This comes just 2 weeks after America's last deadly mass shooting at a Tennessee Christian school. Turning to the latest controversy to hit Tibetan spiritual leader the Dalai Lama, who has apologized after a video showing him kissing a boy on the lips. A statement posted on his official website says the 87-year-old leader regretted the incident and wished to apologize to the boy and his family. The incident occurred at an event in February in Dharamshala. A boy asked if he could hug the spiritual leader, and after the hug, the Dalai Lama asked the boy to, quote, kiss him on the lips and to, quote, suck his tongue, as the boy sticks out his own tongue and leans in, prompting laughter from the audience. All right, well, concerns are growing in the U.S., where the Justice Department has opened a criminal investigation. This comes following a potentially embarrassing leak of U.S. intelligence material on the war in Ukraine. Investigators are searching to find the source of the leak. The Pentagon is rushing to contain the fallout and try to reassure America's allies and partners. Now, that's after 30 pages of what appear to be classified documents were published online over the weekend. The files appear to show that the U.S. is not only spying on its enemies, but also on its allies. All right, staying in the U.S., as America's employers added a solid 236,000 jobs in March, which may indicate that the economy remains on solid footing. Now, this comes despite the 9 interest rate hikes that the Federal Reserve has imposed over the past year in its drive to tame inflation. The unemployment rate fell to 3.5%, which is just above the 53-year low of 3.4% set in January. Average hourly wages were up 4.2% from 12 months earlier. Now, that is down sharply from a 4.6% year-over-year increase in February. Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump is trying to turn criminal charges against him to his political advantage. Mr. Trump has been claiming that the 34 felony charges filed against him last week are part of a plot to interfere with the 2024 presidential election. He's made similar allegations about several other criminal probes swirling around him. Mr. Trump has routinely claimed that elections that he's run in were rigged against him, often before voting even began. Tensions continue to rise in the east as China's military has sent several dozen warplanes and warships toward Taiwan. Now, this is in a large-scale exercise that simulated sealing off the island following its president's trip to the U.S. The Chinese military previously announced combat readiness patrols as a warning to Taiwan. The warnings come after Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen's trip to America, with the most sensitive event being a meeting with the U.S. House Speaker. China responded with sanctions against those associated with her trip and by intensifying military activity near the island. Taiwan has since held their own land exercises with missile launches, tanks, and armored vehicles. Thousands of Israelis, led by at least 7 cabinet ministers, marched to an evacuated West Bank settlement in a mass rally. The demonstration was called a defiant signal that Israel's most right-wing government in history is determined to accelerate settlement building on occupied lands, despite international opposition. The mass rally also threatened to further raise tensions that have been heightened by days of unrest across the region over the contested Jerusalem holy site. National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir spoke at the march, saying that, quote, "We are here to say that the Israeli nation is strong. We are here and we will remain here." In Afghanistan, the Taliban have banned families and women from restaurants with gardens or green spaces in the northwestern Herat province. An official said Monday that the moves followed complaints from religious scholars and members of the public about the mixing of genders. It was the latest in a slew of restrictions imposed by the Taliban since they took power in August 2021. They have shut girls out of classrooms beyond 6th grade and women from universities and most types of employment. They are also banned from public spaces such as parks and gyms. India will soon eclipse China to become the world's most populous country, and its economy is among the fastest growing. But the number of Indian women in the workforce, which is already among the 20 lowest in the world, has been shrinking for years. Now, this is a growing challenge for India's own economic ambitions if its estimated 670 million women are left behind as its population expands. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow us on our social media handles. We're available on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also watch all of our commentary programming on the News Forum YouTube channel. Thanks again for joining us today on Forum Daily News, and we'll see you again next time. Take care, Canada.